Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome back to Podio Commentary. And I just got home from seeing Brendan Fraser in the movie that's going to win this guy a lot of awards. In fact, yes, I'm talking about The Whale, a movie that I honestly did not know a lot about going into it, to be fair. My girlfriend had seen it a couple weeks ago. She really liked it. She wanted us to go watch it. The kids were off with their grandparents for the day. We thought, you know what? Why don't we go watch a very personal drama movie about a man in his last week of life? And, you know, is a fun date sort of thing. Actually was. It was a really solid movie. We both really enjoyed ourselves. And this is a movie that really kind of commands a lot of introspection, I believe, as you're watching that. And of course, in the post internal commentary that you have when you're going home from the movie. This is one that, I mean, if you don't know anything about it, here's essentially what you need to know. Brendan Fraser plays Charlie, a shut-in, a man who weighs multiple hundred pounds, who is very ill, who doesn't take care of himself, who suffers from a very large addiction to food, suffers from gluttony, bad decision-making, shame, guilt, and a whole other bunch of stuff as he tries to reconnect with his teenage daughter after effectively abandoning her years earlier for reasons that they talk about in the movie that I'll get to as we go along, but I don't want to give away everything too quickly. This is one that when I heard, it was like, okay, so I heard A24, Darren Aronofsky, and I thought to myself, when's the last time I actually sat down to watch an Aronofsky film? And you guys are going to give me crap for this, but the last one I remember actively engaging with was Requiem way back when that movie came out. I think the last scene of that movie, you know the one I'm talking about, probably, I don't want to say turned me off to Aronofsky films, but like nothing he's ever really done has kind of put me on the path to wanting to see another one of his films. I don't know why they just haven't spoken to me, but everyone's talking about Brendan Fraser. Everyone's talking about this tour de force, this return of an actor, of a talent, of a man who has been largely forgotten in recent years for a number of very bad reasons in regards to how Hollywood operates. By the way, F the Golden Globes. But it was good to see him, right? And I was on board with that because I'm a huge Mummy fan, Encino Man, George of the Jungle, right? Like, I love a lot of this guy's movies. Airheads is one of my all-time faves. But then, of course, the addition of Sadie Sink as Ellie, his estranged daughter. Now, I thought that Sadie Sink did an amazing job in Stranger Things Volume 4 that dropped earlier in the year. And she does an amazing job here, even though her character does kind of largely play out like a very meaner version of Max in a number of ways. And it makes a lot of sense. She deals with her trauma. She's grappling with how she's felt abandoned as a child and how she views the world and how she hates everyone. And all of a sudden her dad is like back in her life and wants to get to know her. And she's obviously going to have trouble with that. She's obviously going to have issues with that. What I thought was really interesting, though, was Liz's character, the caretaker, the friend, the confidant, right? And I'm asking myself, like, why she engages with Charlie in the way that she does. He's a shut-in. She brings him food. She cleans him up. She looks after him. What about it? What about him is prompting her to do this? Is she someone who is paid to do this? Or is she just a kind soul, a friend, so on and so forth? And as you come to find out her story, and as it was unfolding, the pieces started to click for me based upon the conversations she had had with Timothy, the missionary who had popped up early on in the story. In fact, the opening scene of the movie. And talking about like how this particular church, how it killed her brother, killed his partner. And, I kind of had a lot to think about in regards to, my own church upbringing, right? Like how I felt when I went to church and how I felt when I was excommunicated from church when I was 15 for not doing anything, believe me. And like all those emotions kind of came back to me a little bit as I'm watching the scene unfold and as I'm watching these two converse, because Timothy just wants to help Charlie, thinks that God put Charlie in his path for a reason. And as you come to watch the movie, you start to realize that maybe that's actually the case. Like that's actually the journey, is how all of these different threads kind of interweave together in order to kind of like get us to the end of the film. Because Timothy, I thought, was an interesting character. Guy shows up. Here's Brendan Fraser's Charlie, sweaty in a fat suit, jerking off to gay porn in the opening of the movie. And I'd heard about that scene like before. I knew the scene was in the movie. I thought it would be far more graphic than it was. Even the stuff with the eating of the food, the chicken and the meatball scene, specifically the bucket of chicken. I had seen some reviews of people talking about it, like how it destroyed their relationship with food. And I'm like, well, if you think that was bad, you've clearly been lucky. That ultimately was like, it was gross, but it fed into what Aronofsky was trying to show us in regards to the reliance on food, the gluttony, and how Charlie allowed himself through shame and guilt and everything else to get to the point where he would feel like he had to engage in that kind of feeding spree. It was shame related, especially towards the end of the movie when he has that moment of being witnessed. And there was disgust from a person who didn't know him, and a person who was kind of caring about him, a person who was just trying to communicate to make sure he was okay, sees him, is disgusted, and that just unloads the shame demon, which causes this really, it was intense in my opinion, this intense scene of him just gorging himself with whatever he can. He's like, here's pizza with ham and ranch and like a sandwich with chips and then jelly. And you're like, that is such a culinary disgust, but it makes sense. The sound design in that, the musical score in that was really good to really showcase how he's just kind of like falling down this pathway. The movie is a very interesting story about him in the final days of his life. And the terrible thing about it is that he didn't have to die. That's the thing I don't quite like about the movie, is like, he didn't have to die, but it's based on a stage play. So yeah, the mofo's got to die, right? At any point in time, he could have contacted the authorities. He could have called for help. He could have gotten taken care of, but he chose to let himself die in order to make up for some kind of, well, for the idea of abandoning his daughter. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make sure that Ellie knew that like she would be taken care of, and he chose to go out like this in order to make sure she would be taken care of. But like, she's already like, I don't want to say she's broken and she's bitter. She's definitely bitter, and she's cynical and she's spiteful. And she does things that I don't like. I understand what they were going for in regards to like trying to showcase her acting out. Like, there's a scene middle way through the movie where you think that she's like coming around to Charlie's character. She's coming around to him to make him feel, you know, like that there's a connection there. And she dopes him with an Ambien for no real reason. Maybe it's because she knew that that Timothy was going to be coming over because she had invited him over the day before when she was there. Okay. That part was a little bit weird too. Like, I understand they needed to move the plot along with the characters. How they got there sometimes felt kind of messy. I don't know if that was just cut for time. The movie was under 2 hours long, or if it was something that was just implied in the play because it was written by the same guy who wrote the play back in 2012. So it becomes this kind of like, it's just point A to point B. You have to get there. But while you're there, you're just like, the way Sadie Sink is acting towards Ty Simpkins' character, way they're interacting over like the smoking of the weed and everything else, it just comes across as like unnecessary, like unnecessarily antagonistic. And then like she gets him to kind of like open up about who he is and that he stole money, but she records him. And then she goes and she tracks down his family and sends them the recording. And then they contact him, which is weird because like he apparently threw away his phone. So how would they contact him? They forgive him for stealing the money. They want him to come home. And then he's like, this is my whole thing. I can help you. And he goes to Charlie, and it's like, I get the motivation of trying to like, you know, have there be something with Timothy's character, but I feel like it just was a distraction from the overall movie. Like it's a movie set in one location. It's set in an apartment. That's it. We go out on the deck a couple times. That's about it. There's really nothing else in this movie to take us outside of this environment, of Charlie's environment. that you can almost feel claustrophobic in at times simply because of the way he chooses to live his life. And so by the time we get to the end of it and he knows he's basically at the end, he wants to, like he fought it out with Liz over like him hoarding all that money, even though she's doing all of these things for him, and him like selfishly hoarding it in order to give to his daughter because that was the agreement that he came up with his ex. The fact that like Sadie at the end of that, or Ellie at the end of that, is at this point then trying to like somewhat reconcile with her dad to an extent when she's out there, and she's like, like coming to terms with it at the very end of it while they're doing this big dramatic reading of an essay about Moby Dick. And he finally stands up and he starts walking towards her, which is what she had demanded of him to do in the beginning. And then he dies. As they finally get to the point of where like there's a connection there, he dies. Cuts to white, directed by Darren Aronofsky. And you're like, all right. Like, this is a movie that I don't know if I would watch again anytime soon, but I do like the idea of that it makes you think. It's like, for example, I have a 3-year-old daughter. I have a 5-year-old daughter. And I just, like when you're a parent, you're always asking yourself, like, how do I make this thing work? How do I always make this thing work? And those thoughts came to me as I was watching this, right? Would I ever let my relationship with my kids go so to the point of where this did? And I don't know. I don't think I ever would. But then again, you can't always control how people process grief, how people process change, how people process tragedy. This movie is very introspective on that front. And quite frankly, there's not really one truly, I would say Liz is like the only really likable character. But when you start to realize that like she's enabling so much of Charlie's behavior, it almost does take away from that. But what I will say is that while I don't feel that every character here is likable or every character here is bad, I do say that they are portrayed as real. Real people, real problems, real issues, real growth. And how we oftentimes tend to overlook certain things, or maybe look away from certain things, or maybe not say something when we should, for the sake of not wanting to cause discomfort any more than we already have. It's about shame. It's about guilt. It's about death. It's about tragedy, about loss, and how we cope with that. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this movie. The trailer is rather misleading in my opinion, but I do think that the movie itself was quite good. And if you are looking for something to watch, I do recommend it. You will not see a better performance from Brendan Fraser, and he deserves all the accolades he's going to get, as well as everybody else in the movie. So my hat goes off to them. I enjoyed it. I recommend you give it a watch yourself. But anyway, your thoughts, let me know down in the comments section. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you again for watching Podio Commentary. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.